Hi, this is Stephen Wilson of Porcupine Tree, and you're listening to Backbeat, the rock source with AndreGraziadei.
All music is the same. It's just a new set of lyrics and a new backbeat.
I think it's kind of willfully complex or obtuse. The music is quite accessible, and if people give it a chance, a lot of people do come away liking it. You know, it's not difficult to enjoy Porcupine Tree music. And I think the fact we've stuck around for long enough and almost been stubborn in the way that we've conducted our career is beginning to have an impression. I mean, as I said at the beginning of the interview, you asked me how the tour's going. Every time we come out, we see more people coming to the shows. And yet we haven't really received any more media coverage. It's just been people coming to the show, liking it, going away and saying, you have to come and see this band next time they're in town. And that takes years to do that, but it's beginning to have a kind of cumulative effect now. And a lot of people talk about the band now as being one of the most important, influential, uncompromising bands of the 21st century, and that's very gratifying. I suppose that's when I started. That's all I ever really wanted, to feel like people would talk about Porcupine Tree as a band that have somehow left their mark, left their,
an imprint,
created a sound that can only be talked about in terms of
Porcupine Tree.
Yeah. I think it's kind of willfully complex or obtuse. The music is quite accessible, and if people give it a chance, a lot of people do come away liking it. You know, it's not difficult to enjoy Porcupine Tree music. And I think the fact we've stuck around for long enough and almost been stubborn in the way that we've conducted our career is beginning to have an impression. I mean, as I said at the beginning of the interview, you asked me how the tour's going. Every time we come out, we see more people coming to the shows. And yet we haven't really received any more media coverage. It's just been people coming to the show, liking it, going away and saying, you have to come and see this band next time they're in town. And that takes years to do that, but it's beginning to have a kind of cumulative effect now. And a lot of people talk about the band now as being one of the most important, influential, uncompromising bands of the 21st century, and that's very gratifying. I suppose that's when I started. That's all I ever really wanted, to feel like people would talk about Porcupine Tree as a band that have somehow left their mark, left their,
an imprint,
created a sound that can only be talked about in terms of
Porcupine Tree.
Yeah.
Lazarus off the Deadwing album is I find it such a great song. And whenever I hear the song Chasing Cars from Snow Patrol, that reminds me how much it's a rip-off of that song. Now really, it's true. The melody line is almost identical.
Lazarus is a rip-off of Chasing Cars?
No, other way around.
Oh, I've never heard it, so I can't comment.
Oh, from Snow Patrol. I don't know if you've heard of the band.
I know the band very well. They're very
the song Chasing Cars, the melody line sounds very much similar to Lazarus.
Oh, okay. I should check it out.
And has anyone ever accused you of plagiarizing anything?
Of course, yeah. Every review, almost without exception, that's ever written. I mean, this doesn't just apply to Porcupine Tree. This applies to every review. Period.
Yeah.
Every review tends to look for reference points to compare music to other music. It's the nature of reviewing. So I've read all sorts of bizarre things. I mean, quite more often than not, as in this case, I find our music, we're accused of being influenced or ripping off stuff that I've never even heard.
And for example, this.
For example, this. Although you were saying it the other way around, but I've never heard this song. I can't. Somebody accused me of ripping off a Blackfield song on the last record. Somebody said to me the other day, it's just a note-for-note copy of this song by Placebo. I've never heard the song. Again, I can't. So I suppose in that sense, there's only so many musical, chord progressions. There's only so much to the language of music. Inevitably, you can find comparisons to something.
Because there is another question coming up that's pertaining to a track off the new album.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I have consciously been influenced. Sometimes I have unconsciously been influenced, and sometimes I have found music that has a strong similarity to something else by complete accident and by complete coincidence, something I hadn't even heard when I created my song, and then subsequently somebody says to me, oh, it's very like this, and they're right. But occasionally I do consciously rip off, or not rip off, but consciously kind of pastiche or are influenced by
There's
something.
nothing wrong with it. People will just go, oh, I recognize that from so-and-so.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that. The integration of the graphics and projections on stage is interesting. I found that interesting 2 years ago as I saw you guys touring then, as well as the timing of the images to the songs. Now, who decides on the stage appearance, aside from Lasse Hoyle? He does most of that. Do you have any input on that?
Well, yes and no, in the sense that all of the films that Lasse makes are as a result of me sitting down with him and talking about the lyrics and talking about the ideas behind the lyrics and suggesting images and visuals. But otherwise, really, Lasse then goes away and creates... I mean, we're very lucky with Lasse, because with Lasse I have someone that I implicitly know will understand and realise in visual terms exactly what
You were thinking.
I was thinking lyrically. And it's very rare you find anyone like that in a lifetime, you know. And we're very lucky that we both have this connection. I can just explain to him what the lyrics mean, and I know he will totally encapsulate what I explained to him. And I'm like, I see the film and I'm like, that's exactly
What I wanted. Yeah, that's
and
great.
that's so wonderful. And so in that sense, no, I mean, I have to give full credit to Lasse that he is the kind of visualization of Porcupine Tree, and it's, I mean, it's a cliche to say it, I know, but I'm going to say it anyway. He's like the fifth member of the group.
Well, you think of Storm Thorgerson with Pink Floyd.
Right. Absolutely.
Or Hugh Syme.
Right, yes, absolutely. Yeah, he's someone who absolutely has become the visual identity of Porcupine Tree. The album covers, the visuals, even the promotional photographs of the band are more often than not taken by Lasse.
Yeah. Atmospheric and timeless music is what I think of when I listen to Porcupine Tree tunes. I like the way the songs blend into each other, and it creates a feeling of listening to a journey of chapters which kind of flow without missing anything. What's your intention behind doing that? Letting the tracks flow into each other? Well,
the answer is kind of in your question. I mean, normally, if you hadn't used the word journey, that would have been the word I would have said, because yes, the albums are intended to be musical continuums. They're not supposed to be treated in a way as individual tracks. I mean, we talk about individual tracks, but Fear of a Blank Planet, for example, it's 6 individual pieces, but they're sequenced in such a way that actually I couldn't imagine them in any other order, and in that sense they are within them. Those 6 pieces themselves are a piece of music. They are, and I guess, you know, when I was growing up and discovering music, the music that I really felt inspired by to begin with, going back to some of the artists we've already talked about, these artists, these musicians and writers and producers who had this sense of architecture about creating an album. They didn't just create 10 pop songs and throw them together. You talk about your Brian Wilsons, your Roger Waters, your Todd Rundgrens, your Jeff Lynnes. These are people who constructed albums as musical journeys. And this is something that I think was lost for many years in the 80s and 90s. This compact disc, MTV, post-punk, all of these things kind of eroded this idea of the album as a piece of art, elevating the album to the status of art form. And there are a few artists now doing this, and obviously we're one of them, who really trying to get back to the idea of the album as a continuum, a continuum of music, a self-contained flow of music that is really designed to be listened to in one sitting from beginning to end. And I think our albums have always been like that. And you used the word journey, and that was the word.
No. That's
the word I always think of. It's a cinematic experience. It's a musical journey, and that musical journey has to have the right dynamics, and it has to move through the right landscapes in the right order and in a way that makes the most sense.
You've continued collaboration with other musicians now on this new album, Fear of a Blank Planet. The appearance of Alex Lifeson of Rush, which of course I've been a long-time fan of Rush myself, On the track Anesthetize, definitely sparked me interest in listening to the album carefully. How did you hook up with him?
Okay, Alex. Okay, let's go back a bit.
Okay.
One of the great things about, I mean, we talked about the fact the band are kind of continuing to build, and more and more people are becoming aware of the band. One of the great things about that is the fact that the band have attracted a strong following among other musicians, and I guess we've become, to some extent, a kind of musicians band. Not because of our technical prowess, but because of the way we make records, the kind of care and commitment we have.
The approach.
The approach, yeah. I think other musicians have started to really discover that and respect that. And so it's been a real thrill for me to discover that some of the people I grew up listening to are now listening to us. And you can include Robert Fripp, and you can include Alex. Now, I didn't know Alex. I knew Robert was listening to us because we toured with Robert. But Alex, I had no idea until I read an interview with Alex in which he was asked, "What current contemporary music are you really listening to?" And he specifically mentioned Porcupine Tree. And I was sitting at home reading the magazine, and I sort of fell off my chair because Alex is one of the people, much as yourself, I've been listening to for 30 years.
So you were probably grinning from ear to ear.
I was, yeah. I mean, in some respects, if you put yourself in my shoes, that is the ultimate vindication for everything you do.
Yeah.
Because these are the people that inspired me and wanted me to make music, and now they're listening to our music and being inspired, but certainly enjoying it. So I got in contact with Alex through the journalist, who I also coincidentally had been interviewed by a couple of weeks prior to that. And was very happy to get back an email from Alex saying he would love to work with us. And I think he's one of those guys that probably doesn't get a lot of invitations to work with other bands. He's not known for his collaboration, or maybe he does and he just says no a lot. I don't know. But I was very flattered that he said yes. And I think he's one of those musicians, the moment you hear him, like when you hear him on an Easter
But you know it's him.
Couldn't be anyone else.
No.
Couldn't be anyone else.
No. My Ashes sounds an awful lot like an homage to the Led Zeppelin song No Quarter. Was that intentional? Or are you familiar with No Quarter?
Of course, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not familiar with Snow Patrol, but I am familiar with Led Zeppelin. Homage. I like that sound. I know why you say that. It's because it's an electric piano put through a Leslie speaker, and that's a sound I think a lot of people associate with No Quarter, in much the same way that people associate the mellotron flute with Strawberry Fields Forever. We're not the first band to use electric piano through a Leslie. Led Zeppelin probably weren't the first band either, but it's the most famous example. I suppose it has a similar tempo as well.
Yeah.
It's an amazing track. It's obviously deep in my psyche, and Richards, who I wrote that song with. So we both love that kind of sound and that approach. So it wasn't conscious, but I think that's
subconsciously maybe.
Yeah, that's one of those examples of something you fell in love with that sound, possibly through hearing No Quarter when you were 12 years old, and every time either of us hear that kind of beautiful Fender Rhodes through a Leslie cabinet, we're both, wow, it's just such a great sound.
Let's do something with it.
Yeah.
The track Sleeping Together has a theatrical feel to it, sort of like a movie soundtrack quality material. Have you yet to be approached to compose music for a movie?
Alas, yes. I've been waiting. I mean, it's one of my dreams is to be able to score a movie, or at least a good movie, with a good director. But unfortunately, the opportunities are few and far between. It's funny. I think in the 70s there was a tradition, and the 60s there was a tradition of movie directors commissioning bands and artists to score movies. So you had a lot of soundtrack albums by bands, but unfortunately what's happened in the last 20 years is the movie soundtracks have tended towards
singles,
kind of glorified compilations. You just get record labels placing their bands on movie soundtracks. There's been a few exceptions. The soundtrack by Air to the Virgin Suicides, for example, a Massive Attack did a soundtrack to that movie with Bob Hoskins in it, I forget what it's called. Anyway, but there's a few exceptions. But I think the opportunities for bands to be commissioned by directors to score movies have become very few and far between recently. It's a shame.
All right, last question. Dave Stewart orchestrated strings on the album. Is that the same Dave Stewart as Eurythmics?
No.
Another Dave Stewart.
It's the Dave Stewart that was in Hatfield in the North, National Health. Do you know those guys?
Not really.
Okay. There are a few Dave Stewarts.
Could you ever consider playing a Porcupine Tree concert backed by a symphony orchestra? Would that fit?
It's a good question. I love orchestrations within rock music, but I'm struggling to think of a single example where those kind of things have really worked successfully.
Mm-hmm.
And it obviously has been attempted over the years. I think most recently by Metallica. I've never really been convinced by those kind of... No. But I would love to work more with orchestration on the records, but in a live context, I don't know. It seems a bit unwieldy.
Yeah.
Something about the two worlds that doesn't quite go together.
Don't fit together.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Steve, that was it.
Okay.
Thanks again.